for poisoning my child. That's disgusting. You guys lied to the whole community. That your little toxicologists that work for Dow, that work for Chevron. You're gonna
Where do you want me to send the copies of my grandkids' cancer bills? To your
hands.
Okay, because you know
you're killing kids for your own pocketbook. God will judge you, and you're going straight to hell. Because they're liars. They didn't work in our best interest at all. They worked in the best interest of their own damn pockets. That's who they work in the best interest of. Their own damn pockets. They don't care if our kids are dying.
30 days after.
They'll get one thing about human rights, about people, and about the issues that we're already seeing in our community.
You guys feel like this is a win?
All right, you guys going that way?
That's what the percentage came out to. With the total amount the girls out there and did it. That's the settlement, 600 million. Oh, okay. Yeah, 600,000 goes to the crime. Oh, okay.
No, 162 goes. Mike?
If it's not us, it will be the next city, and it'll be the city after that. It'll be every one of you until this is done. No, how's the fact? But women are fucking going bald.
The same diaper crap that they got, we're getting in Western Pennsylvania, and they didn't want you to hear that.
They put on in East Palestine at the end of February, and I was there asking for answers to my questions. They handed me a mental health card, a suicide card. I said, I'm not crazy, I'm not hysterical. I said, I just have questions that I need answers to. And the journalist looked at me and goes, that's not because they think you're crazy. That's for when you find out they're not going to do anything about it. You know what I mean? He's seen this before, and he knows how this ends for us. It's not fair, and it's not just.
Same thing they did to our vets that came home from the Gulf War. They were telling the VA doctors to get the psych med. Yeah.
Same symptoms. They're still getting sick. People from 9/11 still getting sick with the same symptoms.
Right. Animals being born in Palestine, coming out with forms, missing legs, having a lower cleft palate. They're all Agent Orange symptoms. If we have photos, we've seen it.
Yeah, we're supposed to file a medical claim now with everything that's condensed.
Diarrhea, we've all had it. Our kids have unexplained fevers for a couple days that just go away. They've been tested for mono and strep and everything else, and everything's been ruled out. But why do our kids keep getting fevers?
Nosebleeds.
I won't even have any. I won't even have any money from the settlement to give to my child because they're taking it from the hotel. The hotel, all the money that Norfolk paid for me to live in a hotel because we were going to be homeless. We couldn't live in our home because the chemicals were making us so overwhelmingly sick. We stayed in the hotel for over 17 months. Now Norfolk's taking that money. Well, the settlement is taking that money out from anything that I would be given. I never had an opportunity to take that money and go move into a house. We were only able to take it to live in a hotel. And now that's being taken away as if we were being paid twice. But that was definitely not the case. We actually don't know. We were never told an amount. We had to accept the settlement and opt in before we were given a number.
And something that some people didn't realize before this, there is a part in this clause that if you have insurance claims for the derailment, you are then liable for those insurance claims that you have. Yeah. So
Why don't
if
you
your
all
home
come
got
over
tested,
and listen to what they didn't let you hear in the courtroom here?
Camera's all pointing right now.
So I want to tell you guys, this is something that's not being counted. Our medical issues, we call any kind of Ohio Department of Health. As you can see, they're not taking note of our problems, symptoms, in large part kidney problems, cancers, brain cancers that are coming up out of nowhere. They're not counting the amount of people that have died. We looked into the funeral homes, just a small handful. In a 6-month period, from the time the derailment happened, we had 50 people pass in and around East Palestine. And that outweighed 6 months in any given time
exposure on my doctor's report. From my experience and my son, who was 9 years old at the time of the derailment, we have chemical exposure, we have chemical sensitivities. We still have no way to get follow-up reporting on that. We have nowhere to go to for that. They just tell us if it gets worse, go to the emergency room. And they, that's it. That's our option.
My doctors of 20 years cannot confirm or deny that my hair falling out is a result of this. My hair started falling out within 30 days of this accident. That is unusual for me and other women of my community that are having the same experience I am.
I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism, I was diagnosed with asthma, and I have an adult chronic cough that I have to have a CT scan for now.
Yep.
And these stories are very few of the stories that
All
are
of
going
our
on in
children.
our community
Yeah.
right now. We don't know what's going to happen to our children, and these attorneys hired somebody to tell us there would be no health impacts and no long-term health risks. These are attorneys that were supposed to operate in our best interest.
They did not do that.
They did not do that at all.
We went to medical clinics and they straight up told us we're not seeing anybody from East Palestine.
Did you opt out of the settlement?
I did not, no, because I feel like I didn't have any other alternative. I mean, they forced it on us. I mean, they can say all they want, they didn't, but what was our option? I didn't have an option. I was homeless, I was sick, my son was sick, we lost everything. I lost my job. Yeah, and the doctors won't do anything else.
I invite anyone to come into my home because the last 4 people that have came into my home the last month have not been able to stand and breathe in my house without having severe reactions, almost like they're under the influence of some kind of drug. It is so bad that they had to frantically leave my home, and I'm supposed to live there, and my home's supposed to be safe. It's not. How do I take my child into a home and watch them suffer when we don't have the health care? We don't have the time that we can take off of our jobs. We don't have the help. And this little bit of a class action is not going to do anything once we catch up on all the health bills we had. All of the promises that Norfolk said that they did, but they're not telling you how they badgered us, made us feel belittled. We went in and the people taking our claims knew about our personal history. About 15 years ago, someone was told you had a wreck in a car. That is inappropriate and not called for. So people are uncomfortable even asking for help. There are people still out of their homes. I can't live in my home without being sick. And I've lost feeling in half my arms, my legs, right in front of an EPA agent that did nothing.
Hey guys, I'm gonna get started. I'm going to go ahead and get started. This, first and foremost, this is about the affected residents of East Palestine, and I want to address some specific things. I have been to East Palestine 27 times with 31 rounds of testing. I'm one of the ones that filed a declaration this week that got into the EPA testing, along with the plaintiff's expert, Stephen Petty, who validated my testing results. I have some comments. What you saw here today would be the same result with a Republican or a Democratic administration. It does not matter whether it's an Obama judge, a Bush judge, a Clinton judge, or a Trump judge. You would see the same result. It appears as though the judge had her decision already written, so her mind was already made up. What we have, this illustrates why beyond East Palestine, every single American citizens need to realize this. The system is not fair. And what you saw today is plaintiff's counsel, part of the system, and being enriched. And that's just the way it works. The only way we're going to get the truth out is with honest media covering the real facts. Now, I want to address specifically, the EPA is a captured agency. My declaration is the proof, as is Stephen Petty's. I would encourage all the media, I want to educate you, look at it, because here's what EPA is captured by Norfolk Southern and even the plaintiff's attorneys. And I'm going to tell you how that is. Plaintiff's attorney Elizabeth Graham was either confused or she intended to deceive. I'm just going to say she was confused. When she made the statement about EPA data not being relevant, and I'm going to have to review the transcript, I'm going to tell you in my declaration that EPA Tetra Tech, the EPA doesn't take any data. It's all Norfolk Southern contractors. So that contractor data was withheld. You got to understand what's going on. The EPA is a captured agency. So you had Norfolk Southern, you had the plaintiff's attorneys, all hiding behind the EPA as a government agency. And I can tell you that, so the EPA wanted to fit the narrative. And we've got the proof of the missing data. When I started asking the questions of the EPA, I encourage you to see the exhibit, go specifically to my April 14th and April 16th, 2024 email asking the EPA all those questions. It's in the declaration. So what we have is a revolving door of the EPA. And I was subpoenaed in my driveway by an ex-EPA attorney, Davina Pajara, in Massachusetts, trying to intimidate me, violate all my constitutional rights. Well, they picked the wrong guy. They made my day. And we stood up to them, and they never followed up. But Davina Pajara and a whole host of other people illustrate the incestuous revolving door where people are going to work for the EPA, and then they're selling taxpayers and residents out. And they are not to be underestimated, because if you look at the public relations machine employed by the EPA, you've got a lot of media that just blindly believes the EPA. The facts and the data don't lie. We have all those facts. And I want to tell you, part of someone I'm working with is Dr. George Thompson, a renowned toxicologist who is looking at all the data. And I would encourage you, Stephen Petty, let's put this into context. Stephen Petty, the plaintiff's expert, whose data was hidden and never revealed to the public. If there was truly nothing to see here and everything is fine, his data would have been released. And the plaintiff's attorneys were talking one way in the media with Stephen Petty, and then as soon as the settlement got announced, they talked the other way. The objecting attorney, Dan Abraham, was really taken on by the court. But let's talk about conflicts of interest. You want to talk about conflicts of interest which didn't get addressed in this court, but it's going to be addressed, I guarantee you, in the court of public opinion and in other courts. Because the conflict of interest is $162 million, the switching narrative, and where was the actual data? Why did the EPA cover up the data? That's what needs to be answered. Any questions?
Do you plan on appealing?
I'm not an attorney, and so I can't speak to that. But I'd have an attorney speak to whether or not there's going to be an appeal. But this, I just want to tell everybody, this was to be expected today. And even if they talk about the extraordinary result, well, the extraordinary result is the 162 million plus 18 million in expenses for a year and a half's work for plaintiff's attorneys. That's an extraordinary turnaround. And also, I was on record, I'm not for or against the settlement. I was for transparency, and people deserve more information. They can talk about 99%, 75%. The people that opted in, the PR machine, it's all about undue influence. This $1 billion undue influence of it's no different than $1 billion banks, using illegal foreclosures going into court. We have a system. It's the system. It's not the judges and who they're appointed and what political party. The system favors the privileged elite getting the money at the expense of damaged citizens. This is why every single community that sees this could be your community next. And the only way to change the system is the court of public opinion with an honest media that will cover it. And there has been a lot of undue influence over a lot of the so-called mainstream media. But the good news is there are great independent journalists, and you have a whole host of people like Status Quo, like News Nation, that are covering fairly both sides and asking the tough questions.
What is the data that you have that shows that the air emissions were different than what EPA was publicizing?
Right here. I refer you to the question. As far as the air emissions go and the plume, I refer you to Stephen Petty's affidavit. He says it's wrong. It's in Stephen Petty's declaration. The data I have is sediment. When I started questioning the EPA on April 14th and April 16th, I asked them for a question. Who's the contractor? Arcadis. Where did you get this data? I was asking specific data points from February that showed some questionable results. That when I asked the question, they never answered me. This is in my sworn declaration. They never answered it, and they removed the data points, and they removed the data in the spreadsheets. And you see another thing. You saw Elizabeth Graham stand up there and imply that it was the EPA data and these declarations are irrelevant. Well, I don't believe she was swearing under oath. And the EPA and you know, the workers at Norfolk Southern, they make all these statements and they smear everybody. Why don't they ever sign, under the penalties of perjury, a declaration? So they should be willing to sign a declaration. And also, I want to go into the testing with the soil data and everything else. The EPA, it's Norfolk Southern data. It gets laundered as EPA testing. The EPA doesn't do their own testing, they publish it. I have text messages that I haven't revealed yet, but now I'm going to, where the EPA admits this is Norfolk Southern data. So in my declaration, that is Norfolk Southern data that was withheld. It was, and as far as Dr. Arch Carson, if you look at his 10-minute video, he's holding up, it says EPA Tetra Tech. He's holding up that data. So there's the proof. Any other questions?
What's the next step for the residents? Town hall meeting.
The next step for the residents, I believe there's a town hall meeting with Dr. George Thompson. I believe, you know, and again, I'm not a lawyer. And again, to be clear, I was for transparency here and giving residents all the available information. There may have people that opted in and are taking $12,000 or $15,000 when it should have been a lot more.
Amen.
And when you think about it, I encourage you all to do your own Googling on the plaintiff's attorneys and their affiliations and what they announce about themselves and how they care so much about the human race. And so $162 million. And I'm also aware of plaintiff's attorneys vilifying and talking down to East Palestine residents. And, you know, I wish the judge could have listened to what the plaintiff's attorneys were saying about their very clients.
Thank you so much.
What is your reaction to the judge's response to Stephen Petty being handcuffed?
Yeah, I want to say, as far as Mr. Petty goes, he's on a family vacation seeing some very elderly relatives. It wasn't my place to say that. But now that I know that the judge had her decision already made, you know, I'm not going to say, well, I'm just going to say it makes sense. And if you could see, as objective journalists, look at how Attorney Abrams was treated versus the others. And Stephen Petty has been handcuffed by the court. He's been handcuffed by the plaintiffs. So if the court and the plaintiffs believe there's nothing to see here, and this is such a great settlement, the court should have released Stephen Petty's data. I have every reason to believe that Stephen Petty's data, if and when it gets released, will be line up to line. And I know from residents, I tested some of the same properties. Stephen Petty is not just the U.S., probably the most prominent expert. He's a world-renowned expert, 400 cases. He knows what he's talking about. His declaration, he validated all my testing after, you know, all the smears. And in the PR campaign, the plaintiff's attorneys went out and hired a PR campaign and put Arch Carson up on I think it was August 1st or August 2nd. And the court didn't acknowledge that. So Arch Carson was clearly used as a PR stunt. Again, I was very clear, I'm not, everyone's personal decision to opt in, opt out, or take the settlement is their individual right. I didn't make any recommendations. What I'm for, and sick and tired in my 18 years and 60 disasters, is a captured and a corrupt EPA being manipulated.
Thank you.
It's the system. It's the system.
The fact that we can't sue them.
You said that you did some testing, the results of which were validated by Stephen Petty. When was this testing done? What was the kind of testing?
Yeah, and where can we find your stuff and Petty's?
Well, you can't find Petty stuff yet until a court gives an order for him to. Actually, he is handcuffed, and he is handcuffed by this very court. Until his handcuffs are taken off, you will get his data. But my data, in details and summarized, is in my declaration is 27 pages, but the exhibits are 629. And if anybody in the media has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. It is complicated, but I can back up everything I'm saying with black and white facts in a sworn declaration. Just remember, the PR firms you hear from the plaintiffs, from the EPA, Mark Durno, ask Mark Durno to sign a sworn declaration with what he says. Why aren't any of these other people that are using their undue influence over the media signing sworn declarations?
So So my question is, where did you take the samples from? When? What kind of testing did you conduct?
First of all, I want to say I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for Courtney Miller, who tragically passed away. She reached out to me. I arrived on February 22nd, and I've been here 27 times. I've started testing sulfur run. I've tested soil in and around East Palestine, including Pennsylvania. I even have a scientific team around me where we're presenting an up-and-coming Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry conference. Everything is vetted. So I went to control areas where the plume did not deposit. And if you go to Stephen Petty's declaration, the EPA appears to have used the wrong map and manipulated data. It's very simple. You can very clearly see the EPA is used as a captured government agency to fit the narrative of the billion-dollar company. Then the plaintiff's attorneys come in, their narratives switch. Listen to their words, look at the facts. It's right there to see. It's as plain as day.
Let George.
And now I'm going to introduce George. I'm willing to follow up.
Your first and last name for everyone's name.
Oh yeah, Scott Smith, SCOTT-SMITH.
And your title.
I am an independent testing expert and a government accountability project whistleblower.
Thank you, Scott.
I'm Dr. George Thompson. I came out of retirement to work on this case. I've spent probably over 700 hours evaluating it. I have a couple of charts here that I brought just to illustrate of the town hall meeting that I'm going to present on Saturday. But the first chart here is to emphasize that I looked at every car that was in the Norfolk Southern Manifest as what was contained in that car and what were the hazards related to that. I'm a toxicologist with 55 years experience, and I've written 21 books on hazardous chemicals.
Where did you do your work? Were you affiliated with the university or an agency or anything?
For the last 40 years, I've had an independent consulting company where I work with government agencies, private industry, academic institutions across the board. And as you can see here, as you will see in my presentation, I've color-coded this according to the information that was in Norfolk Southern's manifest. The key thing off of this chart is that there were 17 cars on that derailment that they said were burned. There were another 15 cars that they said were impinged with flame and fire. The total amount here is that there were almost 8,600,000 pounds of material put into the air. 8,600,000 pounds of material released over those 6 days. Nobody's ever talked about that quantity, and so if it went up in the air, the question is, where did it come down? And it didn't all come down over East Palestine, and it went into Pennsylvania, but when I studied the air dispersion models, there were at least 8 to 16 different states that received deposition from that plume. And so when you think about almost 8.6 million pounds, that's not hard to imagine. There were people in Niagara Falls that were complaining of the same acute symptoms of headaches and breathing problems that occurred in East Palestine. And that occurred at the same time in Niagara Falls that it was occurring in East Palestine that same week. So that's just one of the examples that you haven't heard that data that talks about the amounts.
They weren't looking for any of that. They didn't want to find it then.
Is that this is an unprecedented event. I've been studying I've been working in toxicology now for 55 years. And the concept is that normally you look at one chemical and what is the medical health symptom. That's the way we do it. Government sets safety standards for a chemical like benzene. The problem with this case that makes it totally unprecedented is that you have a stew of chemicals that are released simultaneously in that plume, and it's not just one chemical at a time. I've identified hundreds of chemicals that came up out of that fire into the plume.
Here you go, George.
Yes, on the train, the cars in the train carried 8 chemicals or products that could cause cancer. In the plume, I identified 120 chemicals that can cause cancer. And nobody has accounted for that difference. Now what this chart shows, that is going to be in my presentation Saturday, is that I've identified over 20 different types of cancer that were produced, and the chemicals that were produced in the fire that can cause those kinds of cancer. Well, you look at the two big ones here, the breathing cancers here, for the nasopharynx and nose, the lungs here, and there are many, many different types of chemicals that could cause those cancers. And what that means is that when the government sets a safety standard for one chemical, and now you've got 15 chemicals that can produce that same kind of medical injury, the dose levels, the amount of that's safe, is reduced for each one of those chemicals, because their effects can become additive or even synergistic, so they multiply each other. The second thing that happens when you're talking about cancer is that I've had people complain that it's not long enough yet to have cancer after this incident in February of 2023. But the difficulty is when you see all of these things coming at you simultaneously, the body reacts faster. After 9/11, the tumors and cancers there started occurring within 3 to 6 months, not 20 or 30 years, which is what happens if it's one chemical. But when you have massive numbers of chemicals, in fact, some of the chemicals that were released are not, they don't cause cancer, they are cancer promoters. So they enable other chemicals to precipitate their cancer injuries faster and more extensively. Now, there have been 3 cases, as I understand it, since the incident in East Palestine. There have been 3 incidences of cancer. The first one was a man that had breast cancer. That's really rare. And he had to have a double mastectomy. He lived relatively close to ground zero. And so he was exposed to all of this mess that's in this stew. The medical community says, well, sometimes men do get breast cancer. But he was totally healthy before the incident, and then within less than a year afterwards, he's diagnosed with breast cancer. We've had a pastor in one of the churches that's been diagnosed with 2 brain tumors in this same time period. And then recently, I just heard of a lady who's been diagnosed with blood cancer. All of those cancers are on this list. All of the different kinds that we'll talk about in detail on Saturday. And so the final element that I want to emphasize that isn't talked about is in my last chart over here on the side. This is data from my friend Scott Smith, who did the analyses. But this is indications of garlic that was taken from a garden in East Palestine. Here was the year before. These are the levels of forever chemicals, very toxic, some of the most toxic chemicals we know of. And they were very low levels. These are parts per trillion. But you look after the incident in East Palestine, and what Scott found was many multipliers, many much larger concentrations of those forever chemicals. And these dioxins and furans that Scott's identifying here, once you get them in your body, they stay in your body for 7 to 15 years. So if you're eating this garlic and you're getting these levels of dioxins, and you're not just going to eat it once, you're going to eat it this week and you'll eat some next week and some the next month, this is all accumulating because it doesn't leave your body. And so the toxicity of these chemicals is very gross. Dioxins produce cancers in 7 different organ systems in the body. They're very, very potent, but they also injure your liver and your kidney. They change your hormones. They can literally affect many different systems in your body. And none of this information was considered prior to this lawsuit. This was all ignored. I offered to give this information free of charge to the attorneys managing the class action lawsuit. They did not take me up on the offer. The information talking about with Stephen Petty, where he did analyses similar to Scott Smith. Stephen Petty was hired and they paid him a large amount of consulting fee, and then they took his report and buried it. They wouldn't even show it to the residents who are there supposedly representing. And his data confirms what Scott Smith said, is that there are chemicals all over the place. And one of the things that Stephen Petty said is that the sampling plan that EPA and Norfolk Southern followed was designed by Norfolk Southern, and they took the exposure area southeast of East Palestine. When in fact the day on the 6th of February, the wind changed directions and it went northeast. So they were sampling down here in southeast off into Pennsylvania, when in fact the deposits were northeast up into northern Pennsylvania and on into New York. Some of the dispersion models that I looked at showed that the plumes from here, as I've already said, went all the way into Canada. They went as far east as northern Vermont, New Hampshire, New Jersey, and on the south side, the southeast side, they may have gone all the way to Washington, D.C. None of that was considered, because in this lawsuit, in this class action case, they said that the exposure area was 20 miles around East Palestine. 20 miles around it, when the air dispersion model said it could have been affecting up to 16 different states, like a third of the U.S. population. And the last thing that I'll mention here before we have questions, and that is the impact of these chemicals, these forever chemicals that get into the ground. We've seen it in garlic already. Scott's already identified it. What happens to the farmland and farm animals where this fallout of 8.5 million pounds descends upon them with forever chemicals? Now the animals eat the grass, it gets into the animals, and we eat the animals, and it gets in our bodies and stays there for 7 to 15 years. None of that was taken into consideration. I've heard no comments in my year and a half of working on this case where anybody's concerned about the food chain. And what is it doing nationally for people that are legitimately trying to raise crops and animals in this polluted area? And we frankly, even with EPA's negligence, we don't even know the extent of the polluted area. And I re-emphasize that when EPA talks about these low levels, that's for individual chemicals. Now you take 200 other chemicals and add them to it, and the low levels don't continue to be the point of consideration. So I'll stop at that point. If you're interested, I'm giving an hour and a half presentation on Saturday twice, once at the Nazarene Church in East Palestine at 1, and again at 5 o'clock in the afternoon later.
Say somebody like Tom, who has raising berries, apples, and things on his property. Is there a threat to him eating that stuff?
I wouldn't eat it unless I tested it. Test it and see if those toxins and purines are on that fruit, because it could be coming up. The plants could be absorbing it from the ground, and now and it also could have fallen on them from the plume. See, these chemicals, when you saw those massive plumes, that's all carbon. It's unburned chemicals. And what happens to these chemicals themselves is that they're bound to the carbon particles. Like a sponge, the carbon picks up these chemicals. So when the carbon blows around our country and then settles, it's got all these poisonous chemicals attached to it. One of the first things that I told people in 2023 is don't vacuum your homes. As soon as you vacuum that dust up in your homes, you are re-exposing yourself to breathe in all these poisons, because your vacuum cleaner doesn't have a filter small enough to screen out the carbon particles. It's going to go right through and into the air of your home again, and you're just re-exposing yourself.
You know, there are issues just like this. We don't know. You know, we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, anybody can take a bite if they want. Picked this morning.
They look so good.
You know, anybody want to take a bite? That's the problem, right? You know, and this judge is comparing, she's throwing everybody in a hat together. How do you compare one person's property to the next property?
Your point is that it's like you're concerned about eating food that's grown there.
Well, that too, but how do you compare somebody's 10th acre of property to my 22 acres? How is it the same? It's not.
In the class action lawsuit, they talked about their, you know, the way they have this system set up. I don't know, I haven't seen it.
No, they, well, supposedly they did, but nobody's talked to me about it.
So you were at Mr. Abrams?
Yes. Which obviously got thrown out because the judge was very biased towards him. And, you know, it just wasn't good.
I'm sorry, it's like when you were an objector meeting, like you were...
Well, if I didn't, I could show you on my phone. I got hundreds of pictures of bloody noses, okay, and Kleenexes. My wife, losing vision in her right eye. No explanation why. She's been tested by the top people in Pittsburgh. No reason for anything. I hand feed raccoons in my house. I have 2 raccoons that are blind in the right eye. So, but hey, it's all coincidence, right? I mean, nothing going on. Nothing to see. I have no clue. I have no clue. Being that we were objectors, I don't know what's going to happen out of it. Obviously, she settled it, and probably the worst case scenario is we're going to have to pay our lawyer out of our own money versus coming out of the class action, which Dan was trying to get that put into class action. The EPA lied. I caught him in lies personally. Anybody in East Palestine knows that I put a video out of I was gold dredging in Leslie Creek in East Palestine, Ohio, about 3 months before the derailment. The EPA came along and said that creek was already pre-contaminated. Well, here comes Tom and says, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to show you a crystal clear creek. And we were digging in, throwing rocks, digging down at the bottom, clear as can be. And we were there several times. Tom Young.
So one of the people who wrote an affidavit, which was part of the objection, independent testing expert Scott Smith, he was a whistleblower. He's here with us. I want to ask him briefly his reaction. Calling him Scott.
Hey, Rich.
What is your reaction to today's ruling by Judge Lee?
You saw the system work as designed, not as it should today. And what I mean by that, the protection and enrichment of billion-dollar companies and plaintiffs' attorneys at expense of the people of East Palestine.
So you don't think this was a fair ruling in any way?
Yeah, well, the judge had she had a script. She had a ruling already when she walked in the courtroom. So this trial was just a charade for the system, basically. I mean, the judge had you saw it all unfold.
I want to bring in, for our viewers, resident Jamie Walsh. She was the resident who spoke up as she walked out. Jamie, what was your reaction today?
Disgusted, upset. You know, the fact that it was brought up in the courtroom that the plaintiff's attorney hired somebody to tell us there'd be no health risk and no cancer. You know, the fact that they ignored that the plaintiff's attorneys, our own attorneys, hid important data that their expert had. The judge didn't even address that. She wouldn't let residents speak. There were supposed to be residents speaking today, and not one resident got to speak.